Compassion. Great compassion is at the core of Mahayana Buddhism, of which all Mahayana aspirations are born. It would not be Mahayana Buddhism without great compassion. The idea of great compassion, as elucidated by the Buddha, does not exist in any of the worldly schools of thought. The traditional Chinese culture upholds moral principles, and the Western culture advocates charity and social welfare. But the Buddha's idea of altruism, demonstrated by the meditation practice of Tonglen, for example, and the Bodhisattva's commitment to unconditional dedication to others, are unparalleled. Great compassion can be explained in more details from two perspectives. Conventional perspective. For example, at the time when the Buddha was learning the path, he did not hesitate to offer his body to a starving lion. Or, if someone were to force a person in this room to jump off from the 10th floor, the behavior in the true sense of Mahayana would be that everyone in this room volunteers to jump. It is not just paying lip service. One should wish with all sincerity like this: it must be very painful to jump to death like that. Just let me take the pain for them. Such acts of giving, or a forbearance as well, are great compassion in the conventional sense. The real intent of the Dharma is not only to have the motivation for compassion, but also the actual action. Not only to engage in charitable works to release sentient beings from temporary suffering, such as relieving the victims of disasters, giving food and clothing to the needed, nursing the sick and the wounded, and so on, but also to be willing to do anything to liberate sentient beings from samsara, even at the cost of one's own life. However, we should not refrain from doing charity work just because it can only deal with sentient beings' temporary suffering. As Mahayana practitioners who aspire to benefit all beings, it makes sense for us to participate in the charitable activities in the society. There was a story in the Vinaya. A bhikshu who was rendered immobile due to his illness had no one to take care of him. His bed was so filthy that it was as if he slept in his own excrement. One day, the Buddha came to this bhikshu's home with Ananda. The bhikshu panicked upon seeing the Buddha, but the Buddha gently comforted him and took his dirty clothes to wash personally. If the Buddha could do this, we, the followers of the Buddha, would have no excuse not to do likewise. Yet this is still not quite real compassion. Real compassion means that at the time of life and death, one chooses to sacrifice one's own life for others. Although this ideal may also exist in some other schools of thought or theory, it is somewhat limited in their scope. Whereas the Buddha's great compassion is for all sentient beings, not just humans or Buddhists. Supra-conventional perspective. The greater, more extensive compassion entails more than just ensuring the basic needs of sentient beings. Those needs should be taken care of, but they are not the focal point. The most important is to make all sentient beings understand the facts of samsara and the ways to be freed from it. This is the Buddha's greatest compassion, to teach sentient beings the truth first, then the methods for liberation. Why so? For example, a patient can be perfectly nursed back to health. But can we prevent that person from getting sick again? No, we can only help this time. There is nothing we can do for the sicknesses that person will suffer in countless future lives. In fact, any form of material help, be it food, clothing, or money, can only temporarily relieve those in need. Never for long. The only way to completely and permanently release sentient beings from all suffering is to teach them the facts of samsara and guide them to practice the Dharma so as to bring them onto the path of liberation. Ultimately, this is the real benefit to sentient beings, indeed, the true meaning of salvation. Only this type of compassion of the Buddha can be deemed great compassion. The conventional sense of kindness and sympathy for others is also a kind of compassion, but it cannot be described as being great. great compassion is closely connected to the profound wisdom of the Buddha, and bodhicitta, for one, is just such wisdom. We all agree that, in terms of charitable activities, other religions probably have done more, but the wars they started in the name of charity and justice have also numbered not a few. Therefore, it is still debatable whether they harbor absolute compassion or not. Relatively speaking, Buddhism has never meant to conquer anything or anyone. The Buddha also said that he cared not in the least the victory of fighting with another man, but most emphatically the victory from the battle with one's own mind. Furthermore, great compassion has multi-level meanings. The Buddha once said, "I have pointed out for you the way to liberation. You must decide for yourself whether you want to go that way or not." In other words, the fate of each being is in each one's own hands, not the Buddha's. This attitude is different from that of other beliefs, the savior or the creator of which would decide who goes to heaven or to hell. Such difference also reflects the kind of freedom, tolerance, equality, and peace encompassed in the great compassion of Buddhism. Practice of the union of wisdom and compassion. How should one practice wisdom and compassion? Actually, the 6 paramitas practiced by the bodhisattvas are all within the bounds of wisdom and compassion. Generosity, discipline, and patience are practices of great compassion. One-pointed concentration and insight are that of wisdom. Diligence serves as the auxiliary condition to the practice of wisdom and compassion. It is a simple and direct way to define Buddhism as wisdom and compassion. The broader and more profound connotation of Buddhism is the 6 paramitas. If the essence of the whole of Buddhism is being condensed into wisdom and compassion, could there be a way to cover all 84,000 teachings in one sitting of meditation? The answer is yes. That is, to practice wisdom and compassion. Some may question the viability of practicing both in one sitting, as great compassion needs to be practiced with thorough and deep contemplation, while wisdom to realize emptiness requires no discursive thoughts. For us beginners, we need to first cultivate bodhicitta and then receive the bodhisattva vows. Once receiving the vows, bodhicitta, the essence of the bodhisattva vows, will be in our mind stream already. On this basis, one can proceed to practice emptiness. While the thought of wishing all sentient beings liberation from the suffering of samsara may not be that obvious upon entering the state of emptiness, that is, no apparent compassion at the time, still, the bodhisattva vows will accompany us into the state of emptiness, because the essence of the bodhisattva vows has been in our minds already. The bodhisattva vows are not matter, but a condition of mind. Although there are no distinct thoughts going through mind when entering the state of emptiness, the bodhisattva vows do exist at the time. Hence, not separating one from the other, mind and the bodhisattva vows can simultaneously enter the state of emptiness. At this point, the bodhisattva vows are emptiness, and emptiness the bodhisattva vows. The union of wisdom and compassion means thus. Here, union means when we immerse in the state of emptiness, mind attains realization of emptiness that is inseparable from the bodhisattva vows. If one can practice this way, one will be able to grasp all the essence of Mahayana Buddhism and not need any other practice. This is how a beginner can practice the union of wisdom and compassion. If one is able to do this, the essence of the Buddha's 84,000 teachings will be covered in one sitting, in one place, or at one time. As for the respective practice of bodhicitta and emptiness, they have been taught already. Thus, no need to repeat them here. Just combine the two. Naturally, before cultivating great compassion, one should generate renunciation first. One cannot have great compassion for sentient beings if one is unaware of the suffering of samsara, because compassion comes from the suffering of sentient beings. No compassion, no bodhicitta either. The other condition for developing renunciation is the desire for liberation. When seeing the suffering of sentient beings, one aspires to save them from the clutches of samsara forever. But on second thought, how can one help others if one cannot attain liberation for oneself in the first place? With this in mind, the two requisites for generating renunciation, aversion to samsara, and desire for liberation, are complete. Renunciation is the foundation of bodhicitta. Having aroused bodhicitta, one is qualified to receive the bodhisattva vows which one can bestow on oneself. Afterwards, one can begin the practice on emptiness, knowing that the union of wisdom and compassion is the combination of emptiness and bodhicitta, essentially means that one has understood perfectly the quintessence of all the exoteric and esoteric teachings of Mahayana Buddhism. Renunciation and bodhicitta should be practiced separately in proper order and followed by the practice of emptiness. As such, renunciation and bodhicitta that were practiced beforehand will also turn into the wisdom of emptiness. Here, emptiness is not like the Theravada view of no self. Rather, it contains the element of great compassion, and within great compassion, there is realization of emptiness. These views and practices of the union of wisdom and compassion encompass all the implicit significance of the Dharma. However, they are much easily said than done. Renunciation depends on the practice of the four general preliminaries. That is, the conviction of the rarity and preciousness of human birth and impermanence of all phenomena must be generated. For bodhicitta to be aroused, there must be sufficient amount of merit accumulated through mandala offering and obscurations purified and healed by meditation on Vajrasattva. Clearly, one cannot avoid undertaking the practice of general and extraordinary preliminaries, no matter how one chooses to go on the path. This is also the reason why I have been insisting all along on the necessity of preliminary practice. Now that we know the true meaning of Buddhism is wisdom and compassion, we shall learn and practice only these two from now on.